to the Sudo Show. I asked Eric to come back on the show to talk about the recent release of Red Hat Enterprise Linux 9. All that and more on the Sudo Show. Welcome to the Sudo Show, where business meets open source. I'm Brandon. Now, before we get into the show, just a little housekeeping. I just wanted to thank the community for the feedback on the last episode called Giving What We Can. I was surprised by the feedback, quite frankly. It was very positive, and I'm very glad that it was very well received. I haven't selected the project for the first donation. If you have a suggestion, please reach out either on the forum or contact me directly through email or social media. If you haven't already subscribed to the Sudo Show channel on YouTube, I'll be posting some new content there soon, so make sure to get subscribed. Today I asked Eric Hendricks, also known as the IT guy, to come back on the show. Eric is a technical marketing manager at Red Hat for Red Hat Enterprise Linux, which is the topic of the day. Eric also hosts some great content for Red Hat, including RHEL Presents and Into the Terminal. This episode of the Sudo Show is brought to you by DigitalOcean. Head on over to do.co/tux2022 to get started with a $100 credit. DigitalOcean has a comprehensive portfolio of compute, storage, database, and networking products that put your cloud infrastructure in capable hands, so you and your teams can get back to doing what matters most, building world-changing apps that grow your business. Predictable pricing, robust product docs, and services that developers love. Get support at every stage of growth with simple, powerful cloud computing. Get growing at DigitalOcean. As a listener of the Sudo Show and a member of the DLN community, you can get started for free. In fact, it's better than free because DigitalOcean is giving you a $100 credit when you sign up at do.co/tux2022. We want to thank DigitalOcean for sponsoring this episode of the Sudo Show. Today's episode is brought to you by Bitwarden. Bitwarden is the easiest and safest way for individuals, teams, and business organizations to store, share, and sync sensitive data. Bitwarden is an open source password management tool whose feature set rivals any other tool on the market today. Not only is Bitwarden open source, it is regularly audited by security professionals. You can get started for free at bitwarden.com/tux, and plans start at just $10 per year. Thank you to Bitwarden for sponsoring the Sudo Show and Tux Digital. Eric, thanks for coming back to the Sudo Show to discuss the exciting release of RHEL 9, or really from everything I've heard from a roadmap perspective is actually what's exciting about the RHEL 9 release is, to me, is how unexciting it is. Mostly from like a developer perspective, like I'm obviously getting some new things. A lot of the frameworks, the Ruby and PHP, and then the databases that ship in RHEL, they're pretty much the same as what's in RHEL 8. So there's not a huge impact from a developer perspective, but obviously there's going to be some changes that the Linux nerds are going to absolutely love.
So as a technical marketer, I'm kind of two minds of this, because the sysadmin in me says, "Oh, this is so nice. There's not all that there's not all that many changes. There's not any like huge feature that I have to now go in and dive in and spend hours trying to figure out." And then the technical marketer in me as well is going, "Well, it's RHEL 9. It's a 9 point. It's a .0 release. We should probably do something big. We should probably have some big announcements, and we should make a big deal out of this new major version." And it's like, so I can tell you that I'm really glad that RHEL 9 is finally out there. It's GA. You can go download it right now because I can kind of move past this whole situation of what do we market? It's like, well, it is what it is now.
I actually think that that is the thing to market, even though it's not super cool to market. But to me, the feature is it's a new release of RHEL. It's just as stable as the last 8 releases, since technically there was never a RHEL 1. So this is actually the eighth release of RHEL. Uh, so it's to me, it's very exciting. That it is unexciting. There was big changes like RHEL 6 to RHEL 7 with
Hmm.
System D,
Yep.
changing from Upstart to System D. So that was a huge upset, obviously. Another one going from 7 to 8 was the application streams, which
Hmm.
obvious or modularity for the Fedora users in the audience, but unfamiliar with the RHEL terminology. This one, it's nice that there's not a huge upset in terms of technology change. To me, that's the feature.
The life cycle really is the VIP for this release. It really is the part that makes RHEL 9 so important to understand and to utilize because when we've got an episode of RHEL Presents coming up, and one of the things that we really want to drive home is that RHEL 8 is still full support for another 2 years. So RHEL 8, 8.6 just came GA a few weeks ago, and so RHEL 8.6 has pretty much all the same like marketable features as RHEL 9 does. It's still got Podman 4.0. It's still got some of the new system roles that I'm sure we'll talk about here in a little bit. But uh, uh, the main difference between 8.6 and 9.0 is some of the underlying operating system components, like the kernel itself. RHEL 9's got a newer kernel, and of course, some of the supporting libraries and compilers and that kind of thing are a little bit newer in 9 than they are in 8.6. But other than that, from like a feature and an operations perspective, 8.6 and 9.0 are practically identical.
Let's actually expand on that just for the audience that just may not be familiar with the RHEL life cycle. Uh,
Sure,
I'll quickly do just a quick history, and I'll let you talk about the new one.
sure.
So RHEL always had this inconsistent life cycle. Like RHEL, to put it mildly, like for
Right.
example, well, not inconsistent life cycle. RHEL life cycle has always been essentially 7 or 10 years. It changed a few years ago from 7 to 10 years. The release cycle, I should say, actually, the release cycle was always never predictable. It was never predictable. Like there was at least, I think it was 3.5 years between 6 and 7, almost 4 years between 7 and 8. I'll let you comment on this, Eric. What was the huge change in the release cycle for RHEL?
Well, and I think the problem you're looking for is what in the world is the difference between maintenance phase one and maintenance phase two? Looking at you, RHEL 7, what? And you're right, it was 3.5 ish years, and minor releases came every 9 ish, 6 to 9 months ish. And one of the things that I would talk to customers about is who wants to talk to their manager about an ish release. Um, so with RHEL 8, Red Hat did away with all of the confusion and released a completely new cadence, which is why RHEL 9 is such a big deal. Because with RHEL 8, we set forth a cadence of every 3 years. We'll have a new major release, starting with RHEL 8, and now we're seeing that with RHEL 9. We'll see it again in 3 years for RHEL 10. Um, and then we'll do minor releases every 6 months. So we've got one in the spring, we've got one in the fall. We had 8.5 in November. We had 8.6 and 9.0 right after Summit. Uh, so with that, you know that every 6 months there'll be a minor release. There's usually no breaking changes between minor releases. It's usually just a yum update. Sorry, now a DNF update to get from one version to another, one minor version to another. And so now the focus has shifted to How do I get from major version to major version? And that's something where, as a longtime Fedora user, I'm really excited to see finally coming to RHEL, because 6 to 7 was technically possible to do in place upgrades. 7 to 8 was pretty smooth. 8 to 9, I haven't tried this yet, but it looks so smooth. The intelligence that's built into the tool around, you have this third-party repository or you have this package set, which could potentially give you an issue. So go to this Access knowledge base article and make these couple of changes, disable this repository or make this kernel module change, and hit go, and you come back 10 to 20 minutes later, and all of a sudden your RHEL 8 system is now running RHEL 9, which then instead of having three instead of having 7 years of RHEL 8 support, now you have 10 years of RHEL 9 support. And and so going from RHEL 8 to RHEL 9 is going to be smoother than ever. We've got modularity, which we call application streams in Fedora to Red Hat terminology. We've got in-place upgrades. We've got convert to RHEL tools. So it is so much easier to deploy RHEL 8, and now it's even easier to deploy RHEL 9. And so come RHEL 10, I'm predicting a, a little bit of um, a little bit less fanfare around major releases. It's going to become just a number, the more we do this.
One of the advantages I see for a lot of customers, at least that I deal with, is that there will now be two major releases always in production phase one. So what that means is that's the phase of the RHEL life cycle for the first five, I think it's 5.5 years, where
5.
it's just five. Okay. So
Mhm.
5 year for the first five
So
years of its life,
with
where we'll be gain new features and new.
So that was kind of one of the other major changes we made to the lifecycle, is now there's 5 years of full support. So hardware enablements, new features, new versions of workloads, that kind of thing. That's the first 5 years. So, and then after 5 years, you go into the support lifecycle. There's no more support one, support two. It's either full support or maintenance support. Maintenance support is where RHEL 7 is right now, where RHEL 8 will be in a couple of years, where there's no new hardware enablement, there's no new major feature changes um, within that major version. It'll get bug fixes, it'll get security vulnerability patching, things like that. And then I hope none of our systems administrators ever have to use the third piece of the life cycle, and that's the extended support, which is a which is going to be 2 years. It's going to be an add-on cost to the RHEL subscription, but if you've got an application that is set to retire within 6 months, you may not want to try and have to migrate it. If you have hardware that's going out of warranty or out of support in 9 months, you may not want to spend the time and effort. So there are use cases where the ELS, the extended lifecycle support, the 2 year add-on makes sense. But hopefully, with in-place upgrades getting easier and more straightforward, hopefully ELS isn't something that you'll ever really encounter in the field. Then on top of that, we've standardized on extended updates releases, EUS releases, extended update. And what that is typically your even numbered minor releases. So once a year, we actually support a longer life cycle for minor releases. So you saw this with 8.4, now again with 8.6, where that is actually supported for, I think, 2 years. And um, and so if you only want to upgrade your RHEL systems once a year, you could actually skip the fall release and only do the even numbers in the spring. And those are the versions that usually get support from some of our vendors like SAP, or those are the ones that are targeted for some of the government certifications like uh, DISASTIG or PCI or HIPAA. Um, so there's all these different layers of functionality within the lifecycle itself now, and we're using much more specific numbering. 5 years of full support, not 3.5 to 4-ish whenever we get the minor release out. It's really helpful for customers and members of our community, but it's also so much easier on the engineering team because the pressure's off to, do we cram this feature in at the last minute, or do we just wait? We can wait 6 months and put it into the next minor release because we know when it'll be out, and we can take the extra time to make sure that that's crisp, that it's bug free as possible. It really makes life easier all around, unless you're in marketing and you have multiple major versions now to support in the wild.
Yeah, it's okay.
I'm
It's
I'm
not
being facetious, of course. It's job security. Let's call it that. It's job security.
one of the features that I've never really taken full advantage of in RHEL is system roles.
Hmm.
Uh, can you give the audience, just anyone as may not have heard of system roles, a quick overview of what system roles are?
Definitely. So within RHEL, we're helping to tell the customer story. Of course, that's marketing jargon for, you might use RHEL to build out a greenfield project, or um, to modernize an existing application onto a modern operating system. So these are problems. These are real world problems that systems administrators face. And one of the major problems that we see in the industry is problems maintaining like for like systems. The issue of maintaining configuration, especially nowadays where you have multiple systems on multiple platforms, potentially public facing or private facing. I mean, think about the number of platforms that we support these days as a sysadmin. You've got bare metal, you've got virtualized, you've got private cloud, something like OpenStack or VMware, you've got public cloud, you've got uh, and then you've got kind of a newer platform that's gaining traction that Red Hat refers to, or that the industry actually is referring to as Edge. So you've got all these different platforms. RHEL is really good about being a platform, an operating system, a foundation of your tech stack that you can run anywhere on countless different configurations. But how do you maintain that? How do you maintain your basic system configurations across such a diverse fleet of servers? That's where system roles comes in. System roles are basically ways to manage system services, and we're even getting into workloads now to with nothing more than like a 15 to 20 line Ansible playbook. So think about this. With RHEL 9, we introduced a firewall system role. So now you can install the firewall service. You can set firewall D to start on boot, and you can say that this system is going to be a web server. So we need port 80 and port 443 available. You can set all of that within a playbook, within as variables for a playbook, and you can run the firewall system role, and within seconds you can have that distributed out to anything that's tagged as a web server. Expand that out one level further. I got to do a webinar a couple of months ago where I got to talk about Microsoft SQL Server, which as a long time developers, Microsoft era sysadmin, um, was just bizarre. I actually installed live on air on a webinar Microsoft SQL Server using a system role, and this blew my mind. And I work on this stuff all the time from a marketing and technical perspective, but this was so cool to do live because it probably took about 10 minutes to install the dependent packages and to fill out the variables for the system role. But in the end, I was able to accept the licensing agreements. I was able to specify that this is a trial license versus like a premium or a standard support license. I was able to have Microsoft SQL Server set to install. It could set up encryption keys so that all database traffic, if I were running like within a cluster, would be encrypted communication, and was even able to open up the management port in the firewall so that I could remotely administer Microsoft SQL Server databases. Like I said, it took about 10 minutes to kind of put all the pieces together, but when I actually ran the system role, when I kicked off the playbook, it took 57 seconds. I went from having a vanilla RHEL 8.x box to having a fully ready to deploy, ready to use Microsoft SQL Server instance in 57 seconds. I mean, it is awesome what you can do now. And I could tag multiple systems and I can cluster them together. I can deploy system roles to configure the firewall, to set up web console, to set my to set encrypted traffic on my NTP server connections. I can do all of this stuff using nothing more than these tiny little Ansible playbooks, and I can deploy them anywhere within my infrastructure. System roles are so cool.
What's the latest system rules for RHEL 9?
Firewall's definitely one that I'm excited about. Another one that I can think of off the top of my head is you can now configure the service or the socket and the authentication methods for the web console. So if you use some of the RHEL upstreams, you're probably familiar with the Cockpit project, which brings a lot of graphical systems administration tools under a single utility. So you can actually configure and deploy the web console using a system role. There's a couple of others that spring to mind, like the new SQL Server system role that I was talking about. There's about 6 or 8 or so that come out, and there's new ones every minor release since 8.0. So if the service that you're interested in doesn't have a system role yet, it's probably on the roadmap somewhere. And there is a blog series that I'll make sure to link to Brandon in the show notes to cover all the system roles that exist.
I also have links to all the current available system roles in the show notes as well. Isn't there a lab for that, Eric?
There is, in fact, that was part of our releases. We just did a big migration on our lab environment for lab.redhat.com. But yeah, there's a system roles lab as well.
Great. I'll have a link for that as well. Based on what you've already said, Eric, the main theme for RHEL 9 is mostly release consistency.
Mhm.
This is really that first release where we're really seeing that. Was there any worry about making it out on time?
Not that I saw. There's kind of the usual release apprehension that comes with any product, but I don't think that having multiple majors in full support right now was added anything more to it. In fact, this within the RHEL team, this was as close to a non-event as I've ever seen here at Red Hat, or even before at GitLab. It was just kind of business as usual. There's the usual feature questions of, is this feature going to be ready or not? No, we'll okay, fine, no big deal. We'll push it off till the fall. Or hey, we got an urgent request in from someone upstream to include this feature, so let's go ahead and work to certify it for RHEL. So I mean, it really was as close to a non-event as you could get with a major release.
That's good. Just seeing how product works. Like we did our careers episode with you. I think it was now either 1 or 2 ago, but it's I believe we hit on this a little bit. Is like just that releasing a product. There's always like this, working on building that hype, and in terms of like the internals, like if it's a non-event, that just means it's going to be a good release and everyone's working together and we're going to be you know very happy with the end results. I'm trying to keep the red hat off for this, but I am pretty excited about RHEL 9. So, another question around this, around the release I had is, and if you can't answer this, that's fine, Eric. I mean, this is a loaded question, and just because it's new and like and we're probably still trying to figure out how all this works. I mean, not just as a company, but also from a community standpoint. So this is the first release where we actually got to see a community development model around enterprise Linux with CentOS Stream 9. Yeah, like I said, it might be too early, but have you seen or heard how the CentOS Stream community has influenced the RHEL 9 roadmap, or even or even now the minor releases are already starting to see the influence for RHEL Next?
I knew you were going to ask me about this. even before I looked at the show notes for today. But for me personally, sitting in the RHEL BU as part of the marketing team, I haven't really seen a lot of influence yet. But what I see is a lot of excitement. What I see is a lot of potential. What I see are a lot of long-term conversations taking place, um, where maybe 9.0 for RHEL doesn't really have much of CentOS Stream's fingerprints on it. But what I do see is a lot more open and encouraging conversations between engineers and community members. Of course, some engineers straddle that line and are both, um, but what I'm seeing is people that are heavily involved in the community that say that I think Red Hat Enterprise Linux should address this use case, and engineers going, we agree. And as a matter of fact, there's a sig for that. There's a special interest group for CentOS Stream. In fact, I know you work in telecommunications, Brandon, and there's one, if not several, CentOS Stream special interest groups that are designed to address the issue of how does an enterprise operating system support modern 21st century telecommunications. So I know that those are forming. I know that those are gaining traction. So if there's a feature that you're missing in RHEL, if there's a use case that you feel RHEL is missing, CentOS Stream is not a company line. I know that's not saying much for someone whose job it is to present the company line, but as an open source advocate, as someone who started his career as part of the community, it's just it's out there, it's happening. These conversations are going on every day, and they're happening in public. I mean, you can go out to CentOS Stream's repository on GitLab. You can you can communicate with issues, you can open Bugzilla requests. And what's great is now all this development is out in front. It's not looking in the rear view mirror with what CentOS Linux was, but instead it's what's coming to RHEL. Well, look at CentOS Stream.
Special interest groups are actually pretty interesting to me. I'm actually trying to actively participate in one. It's one of the things that I'm very excited about is just finding the time
Right.
to participate. I mean, I have so many things going on. I'm, obviously at my day job, I'm running this podcast and I'm also developing new content for elsewhere and well, specifically for Sudo Show Labs. And so time is limited. I'm also doing other development work that in the community that I haven't been active. I haven't been active in years. It's been probably almost a decade, and this is the most I've been active in open source development in a long time. So seeing these special interest groups and CentOS is really interesting to me. I'm really interested to see what the hyperscale SIG is doing. That's the one I'm trying to
Hmm.
participate in right now. The NFE SIG, which has been kind of, I don't want to say stagnant, but I just haven't seen a ton of work in at least in a little while. The other one I think is really interesting is the container SIG, which
Hmm.
works closely with with the OKD community, Podman community, etc., and the virtualization SIG, which works very closely with OpenStack, the Zen project as well. That's XE, the original Zen source hypervisor,
Hmm.
and other projects around virtualization like KubeVirt. So yeah, it's
Definitely.
really cool to see these things working and influence and starting. I'm not going to say it has, but
Hmm.
I just wanted to ask someone who actually is actually seeing it inside of the company. I see it a little bit, but I don't have the same view that you do.
I know we have a roadmap leading up to RHEL 10, and I know we have an idea of what RHEL 10 might look like. But the more momentum that CentOS Stream and a lot of these SIGs in particular are getting, the more I think our idea of RHEL and RHEL 10 is going to have to change with the community, and that's not a bad thing at all. I mean, from a community member to one of the VPs over RHEL, I think all of them would tell you this is exactly what we were hoping for when Red Hat backed Stream.
Switching gears back to the release, I know one of the big focuses of RHEL 9 is Edge. I know this isn't exactly your area. I think you can still answer this question. This one's a pretty softball. What makes RHEL for Edge different from a traditional RHEL system?
Y'all know me by now. I like to put my fingers in everything, and I get to do a little bit of that in my current role. So with RHEL for Edge, it's a developing space. It ties into a lot of what we're doing in systems automation and configuration management. It ties into a lot of communication technologies, things like 5G. It ties into concepts of having a distributed application model versus having everything in a localized store in a data center somewhere that could be halfway or completely from one end of the country to the other, but having localized nodes. That's what Edge is. It's having distributed application nodes across a country or across the globe or even across a metropolitan area, thinking things like smart cars and smart city grids and that kind of thing. And so Red Hat Enterprise Linux for Edge is Red Hat's approach to how do you use RHEL to solve that particular use case. And there's a couple of major uh, differences between the traditional operating system, and RHEL for Edge. For one, RHEL for Edge is based upon RPM OS tree. So you don't go in and make direct changes to the operating system like you would with traditional RHEL. What it does is it sets you up to be more consumable towards things like containerized workloads, um, being able to run on smaller platforms, thinking like ARM devices, which Red Hat Enterprise Linux now supports system ready ARM platforms. So looking at both smaller devices, something that could fit in a storage closet, or much larger ARM-based server farms, being able to then deploy just about anywhere onto multiple different types of platforms, uh, server platforms, really makes RHEL for Edge appealing, especially when you think about not having to make you don't log in the traditional, I'm going to SSH into the server, I'm going to install these packages, I want to make these configuration changes. By its very nature, RHEL for Edge is designed to be much more automated. And with RHEL 9, one of the major things that's coming in different forms is being able to manage your RHEL for Edge easier. We're looking at zero touch provisioning. We're looking at better integration with Red Hat Insights to get proactive reporting and vulnerability assessments. We're looking at integrating with Podman's ability to run auto updates or auto rollbacks, um, so that even if you have intermittent contact with these servers, at least you're getting constant communication back as to the health of those systems. So it's still a space that's developing, and it's going to continue to be part of the RHEL story for quite some time. But it's also one of those spaces that no one really has figured out what does the solution look like. But RHEL for Edge is definitely, of course, I may be a little bit biased, but RHEL for Edge is definitely one of the leaders, I think, in having solved that issue, or it is in the process of solving that issue.
Edge will likely, at least some deployments, would be managed from Red Hat Software as a Service platform, Red Hat Insights. It's not just used for Edge. This has been part of RHEL for some time. Just for the listeners that don't know what Insights is, one of the things that I personally think that this is not talked about enough. So can you just give the listeners a quick overview of what Red Hat Insights is and why it's important for a RHEL deployment?
Well, I definitely agree, and I know John Spinks, the technical marketing manager for Insights, would definitely agree with you that this is something we do not talk about enough, and it's an unfortunately well kept secret. It feels like within Red Hat Enterprise Linux is if you have a RHEL subscription, you have Insights. It doesn't cost you anything more, and it it's maybe two commands to set it up, or better yet, you can just use image builder, and when you create a template you can have it set to automatically register with insights on deployment. So in some cases, it's zero touch provisioning. And what Insights does is it's a proactive monitoring and reporting system. It doesn't make any changes to your system on its own. It just pulls in data and then compares the performance, it compares the health, it compares the list of packages and what modules you have enabled, and it compares that against what has to be hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of support cases that have been opened as part of Red Hat support, and it looks at what are the fixes, what types of bugs might your system be vulnerable to. In fact, Red Hat Insights not too long ago actually helped Microsoft Azure find and identify and build a fix for what was their big vulnerability not too long ago. There was some kind of privilege escalation bug in Microsoft Azure, and Red Hat Insights helped them identify it. And Microsoft and Red Hat worked hand in hand to develop a fix for it. And Red Hat Insights was one of the first, if not the first tool to be able to identify the fix. And what's great is it's not just a reporting tool. It's not just a set of performance graphs, but it has compliance features to let you know when a certain there might be a conflict in certain configurations, or it looks at PCI or HIPAA or security certifications like that to let you know whether or not your system's compliant. So it's not just a reactive tool, and it's not just uh, it doesn't just sit on the sidelines and tell you what's going on with your systems. In fact, it will allow you to generate Ansible playbooks that could then be run either through the Ansible automation platform, Red Hat Satellite, or deployed manually or downloaded automatically to your systems to run these playbooks so that you can actually apply fixes right from the Insights console. In fact, if you go to lab.redhat.com, there is an Insights Advisor, I believe, is the service. There's an Insights Advisor lab where you actually walk through. Here's here's a known bug, generate a playbook, deploy it, and then look at that system's newest check-in, and it'll show you kind of a before and after of you ran this playbook. It took all 30 seconds to run, but here was the vulnerability before, and now that vulnerability is gone. So it is so incredibly powerful, especially when you think about how systems administrators used to handle 1 or 200 servers each, and now are being asked to manage 600, 1,000 servers across multiple different footprints, from public to private cloud, bare metal to virtual machines. Red Hat Insights, I like to say, is like the sysadmin that never takes a day off, never shows up late, doesn't come in hungover after the big game. It is, I mean, it is a force multiplier that I so wish I had as a systems administrator.
We have a tool in on the sales side that allows us, and I think support has access to this as well, where they can see how many insights hits systems have in from a particular customer. I showed a customer their insights hits, and I'm like, these are the improvements you can make. This system that you registered is still vulnerable to XYZ. I don't remember which vulnerability it was, but I thought that was pretty cool, like that driving value, and it's just included as part of the subscription, which is really neat.
I mean, if I were running a startup, or if I was CIO at a company, I mean, Insights on its own, I feel would pretty much justify the expense of Red Hat Enterprise Linux subscriptions. It 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 really can make that much of a difference with your systems administrators.
Yeah, absolutely. It's like I said, it's the unsung hero of the Red Hat ecosystem.
Hmm.
Well, specifically the Red Hat ecosystem, not like obviously like our ISV partners, but like
Right,
what's
right.
part of pure play Red Hat software. So as being part of RHEL, Satellite, and OpenShift, etc. Probably should have just asked this right at the beginning, but is there anything that you are super excited about this release of RHEL? that everyone should go check out?
Does surviving Red Hat Summit and the release of RHEL 9 count?
No, it does not
Oh,
count.
okay. Well, in that case, there's a couple of things that come to mind. The first is Podman 4. Podman 4 supports DNS names and dual stack support, so your containers now can have multiple IP addresses assigned to them. So as kind of the ops guy, I don't know exactly how that's going to play out, but the idea of having a container with multiple IP addresses that I can then reference by host name sounds really powerful when it comes to building a distributed application.
Yeah, it's a couple of things there. So specifically for dual stack, what's cool about it is it now supports both IPv4 and IPv6 addresses. And then on top of that, I believe I need to go double check is that you can attach it directly to your network as well and have multiple interfaces on the container. That's been a feature inside of Kubernetes and OpenShift for quite some time, utilizing Multis. I don't
Mm.
remember exactly how Podman does it, so I need it. That's something I need to go read up on again. If I knew you were going to say Podman 4, I would have immediately made sure to have that answer on hand.
Yeah, and probably one of the most beneficial features for Podman, and this isn't explicitly on Podman 4, but it is a newer feature, is the automatic update and rollback of container images. The use case for a large enterprise makes total sense, but as someone who also has a growing home lab, I'm just glad that I don't have to update my Plex container by hand anymore.
Anything else besides Podman that you're super stoked about?
So my buddies over in product marketing or product management PMs on the engineering side would not forgive me if I went and talked about RHEL 9 without mentioning the image builder service. This is really cool. It's built on the same on the same Red Hat infrastructure as Insights, but what it does is it takes the image builder application that you can tie into web console and removes the need to have a subscription for it, removes the need to stand up hardware to manage image builder. Instead, what it does is you let Red Hat manage the underlying infrastructure, and you go in, decide what platform you're going to deploy a workload to, whether it's physical. You can generate an ISO with a baked in kickstart file. You can generate a QCOW2 file to run on OpenStack um, or on local Linux machines. If your developers have copies of uh, your operating system template to develop against, you can spin up AWS templates or Google Cloud Platform or Microsoft Azure templates that you can then share out as your golden image. So once you pick your platform, then you can actually create users using Image Builder, assign SSH keys. You can determine a package list. So if you know that all of your systems need some kind of network diagnostic tool like dig for DNS or some of these other or some set of packages, like I use Vim enhanced and tmux on pretty much all of my systems, so I can build those into my images and then deploy them anywhere.
Yeah, we've had tools like that before, tools inside of RHEL, and of course there's many other tools outside of the Red Hat development ecosystem
Mhm.
that I think are really cool.
Yeah, and Image Builder is kind of the latest in that generation of being able to manage your golden images, your sort of your blessed build, if you will. Looking at the roadmap there, there's some exciting features. Like most recently, we released the feature to have customized file system layouts. So Image Builder before 8.5 would only support a large root partition. Everything went into the same partition. Now you can deploy non-LVM based file systems. So if you need a separate file system for /temp or /home or /var/log, you can set up multiple non-LVM partitions. So logically, the next iteration of Image Builder should have LVM support in it as well. But what's really exciting about the hosted service versus the built-in application is that the built-in application is tied to the RHEL release cycle. So only every 6 months will you get these new features. The hosted service will actually be on a much faster cadence, if not 4 times a year, maybe more frequently. I don't. They haven't really stated what their plan to release cycle is going to be, but I do know it's going to be much faster than RHEL. So if you want to be able to utilize Image Builder to manage your technology stack, to manage your templates across a wide range of platforms, Image Builder hosted service is, and if you have a RHEL subscription, you can use the hosted service, and you don't have to spin up a separate box to manage all your images. They're just there. You just go to cloud.redhat.com, or sorry, console.redhat.com, and it's there. It's ready.
Eric, anything else you want to close us out with?
I think one of the last things to mention about RHEL 9 is more about RHEL itself than about RHEL 9. Not only has engineering moved closer to the community with stream support, but RHEL and Red Hat are trying to be more involved visibly in the community. So I know there's some confusion when I stopped hosting Sudo Show, but one of the reasons for that was to help get some of these initiatives off the ground. So we really took a good long look at our YouTube channel. I literally spent hours upon hours going through and cleaning up 10-year-old videos and pulling down duplicate videos and that kind of thing. And we rehashed our live stream presence. We stood up a RHEL Twitter handle. Red Hat Enterprise Linux is trying to be more accessible, not just from a technology perspective, but also from an engineering and community aspect as well. So if there's anything else to if this just gives you a taste of what Red Hat Enterprise Linux and what RHEL 9 looks like, join us for RHEL Presents. Join us for Into the Terminal. Follow us on Twitter and Mastodon. Um, there's just a ton of content that we're producing right now, and I'm really excited to be a part of it.
Thank you so much for joining us today. As always, your feedback is welcome. Head on over to sudo.show/discuss. If you'd like more of the Sudo Show, you can find it over at sudo.show and on social media at Sudo Show Podcast. You can catch more awesome content over our network partners over at tuxdigital.com. You can support the show on Patreon at sudo.show/Patreon. There will be a link in the show notes. Eric, anywhere you'd like to send our listeners?
As always, you can catch me at IT Guy Eric on social media or at my website, itguyeric.com.
You can follow me on most social media at dbrandonjohnson or my website open-tech.net and new content at tuxdigital.com. Thank you so much for listening to the Sudo Show, where business meets open source. Until next time.